It was just after 2 a.m. The radar went dark over Louisiana. Moments later, a small twin-engine plane came screaming across the sky, skimming treetops, moving so low it nearly clipped a church steeple. There was no call to air traffic control. No flight plan. And by the time police arrived, the pilot was already dead. Not from the crash. He had been shot. In the chest. And in the duffel bags all around him. 585 pounds of Colombian cocaine. Street value? Over $300 million. The man in the cockpit was Barry Seal. A father of 3. A former commercial airline pilot. And, allegedly, an undercover operative for the CIA. Before that night, few outside the intelligence world had ever heard of him. But deep inside hangars across Central America. In jungles guarded by child soldiers. And at airstrips controlled by men like Pablo Escobar. Barry Seal was a legend. They called him El Gordo. The fat man. Not because of his weight. But because of how much cocaine he could move in a single flight. For years, Barry played both sides. Smuggling for the Medellin Cartel. And informing for the CIA at the same time. One day he was having dinner with drug lords in Honduras. The next, flying secret reconnaissance missions for the US government. And here's where it gets darker. They say he was untouchable. Protected by the highest levels of Washington. Until one day, they let him die. So what happened? Who pulled the strings? And what secrets did Barry Seal take to his grave? Because what you're about to hear is not just about cocaine. It's about power. And betrayal. And how one man, caught between cartels and covert ops, nearly brought the entire US government to its knees. He flew weapons into Nicaragua. He flew drugs out of Colombia. And he filmed Pablo Escobar's inner circle with a hidden CIA camera. Just weeks before the Medellin Cartel put a price on his head. Then, one quiet night, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the US government told Barry Seal, "You're on your own." And within days, he was gunned down in front of a Salvation Army halfway house. Shot 6 times by Colombian hitmen. The government called it tragic. The cartel called it justice. But Barry Seal? He had already warned his wife. They're going to kill me. And they're going to make it look like it was never supposed to happen. So who was Barry Seal, really? Was he a rogue pilot who got greedy? A patsy in the CIA's war games? Or a patriot, thrown away by the very country he tried to serve? This is the story that Hollywood got wrong. This is the story they tried to bury under classified files and closed-door hearings. A story of smuggling, surveillance, and sacrifice. And of a man who, for a time, was America's most dangerous asset. And its most expendable. And it all starts here. With a young pilot. A promise of adventure. And a flight that would change history. Buckle in. This is the true story. Of the pilot who smuggled for the CIA. You're watching a true crime cartel original. Before we dive in, I've got a small favor to ask. If you love deep, real stories, the kind that dig beneath the headlines, tap that like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment below. With the city you're watching from. It helps more than you know. And keeps stories like this alive. Now, let's get into it. It was just before midnight on February 19, 1986. The silence over the Louisiana night sky broke only by the soft, almost ghostly hum of a twin-engine Fairchild Metroliner descending toward the outskirts of Mina. This wasn't a commercial flight. No transponder. No lights. But it was carrying something far more valuable than passengers. The pilot had done this route dozens of times. In and out. Jungle to airstrip. No questions asked. He was calm. Cool. Experienced. But this night, something was different. Someone was waiting. As his wheels touched down on the dimly lit private strip, sirens exploded out of the darkness. DEA. FBI. State troopers. Guns drawn. Helicopter circling. He didn't resist. He knew it was over. Inside the plane, they found it all. Hundreds of kilos of cocaine. Street value, nearly $60 million. Wads of cash. Stacks of flight logs. Photos. Coordinates. Government contact numbers. But here's what shocked them most. Inside the cockpit? An envelope. Labeled, CIA, do not open. The pilot's name? Barry Seal. A former commercial airline captain turned drug smuggler. Turned government asset. Turned something else entirely. He wasn't just flying drugs for the Medellín Cartel. He was also, allegedly, flying covert missions for the CIA. At the same time. That night, as the agents took him into custody, they believed they had just brought down one of the most prolific traffickers in American history. But what they didn't realize was who he was working for. And what he knew. In the hours that followed, news cameras flooded the small Louisiana town. An anonymous pilot had been captured with millions in cartel cocaine, and files that seemed to implicate U.S. agencies. Seal was thrown into federal custody. No bail. High-level clearance only. And in a secure room in Baton Rouge, the questioning began. Seal didn't flinch. He told them everything. From Pablo Escobar. To Manuel Noriega. To CIA-run airstrips in Central America. He even named names. Dates. Locations. He gave them so much, they didn't know what to do with it. And so, they made him an offer. Become a federal informant. Keep flying. But this time, for them. Seal agreed. But it was a devil's bargain. Just weeks later, his own plane was rigged with hidden cameras. He was sent on a mission to infiltrate the Medellín Cartel, under direct CIA supervision. His job? Gather visual evidence of drug operations involving Nicaraguan military officials. And possibly, prove that the CIA had been helping fund it all. The mission was insane. But Seal did it. He came back with proof. Photos of Escobar's top lieutenants. Planes. Crates. Government officials. Weapons. And suddenly, Washington went dead silent. No press. No praise. No protection. Seal had crossed a line. He knew too much. That's when it started. The leaks. The threats. The silence from the agency that once gave him orders. And then, the hit order. The cartel found out. Someone told them. Someone, high up. They sent assassins. And Seal knew it. He requested protection. He begged for it. But no one came. On February 19, 1986, exactly 1 year after his infamous arrest, Barry Seal walked out of a halfway house in Baton Rouge. He was unarmed. Alone. And already marked for death. 3 men in a car waited. They opened fire. 7 shots. Point blank. In the chest. Seal was gone. So was the evidence. So were the files. The case was closed. Or so they said. But behind the scenes, people were asking questions. Who really pulled the strings? Who allowed a key informant to be executed in cold blood? And why were his connections to the CIA erased from official records? Was Barry Seal just a smuggler who flew too close to the sun? Or a government pawn, silenced to protect something much bigger? Because what the world didn't know was that Barry Seal had been working for the United States government for years. Not just as a snitch, but as a covert asset. Flying drugs. Funding wars. And documenting everything. And what if I told you that some of the same men who paid him also left him to die? And that somewhere, buried in sealed archives, are documents, photos, and voices that may prove it all. This was just the beginning. To understand how a commercial airline pilot became the centerpiece of the drug trade, and why some believe he was the key to one of the biggest covert operations in U.S. history, we have to go back to the very beginning. Barry Seal, born Adler Berriman Seal on July 16, 1939 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. A quiet child of candy store parents, his world would soon spin into dizzying heights of speed, power, and recklessness. Barely a teenager when he discovered flight, Barry earned his student pilot certificate at 16, soloing after only 8 hours of training. His instructor later said, "That boy was first cousin to a bird." He was charismatic, magnetic, even a natural storyteller with a daredevil streak. By 25, he had joined the Louisiana Army National Guard's Special Forces, trained at Airborne School, and earned his wings in 1962. Soon after, he was hired by TWA as a flight engineer, and by the late 1960s was one of the youngest Boeing 707 command pilots in the fleet. But Seal's hunger for more adrenaline, more money, led him down a darker path. In 1972, he was busted smuggling plastic explosives to anti-Castro Cubans aboard a DC-4. Though charges were dismissed, TWA fired him, and Barry disappeared from mainstream aviation. For a while he floated on the fringes, seduced by risk. By the mid-1970s, he had begun trafficking marijuana from Central America into the U.S. He'd load duffel bags, fly low over oil rigs to evade radar, and drop the loads into the luxuriant bayous of Louisiana, where ground crews would retrieve them under cover of swamp fog. It wasn't just the money, it was the thrill. He earned reputations, nicknames like El Gordo for his size and swagger, and began delivering thousands of kilos, earning as much as $1.5 million per run by the early 1980s. Meanwhile, whispers circulated, Seal had contacts in the CIA. In 1978, a CIA case officer, Monty Schaefer, according to public accounts, allegedly recruited Seal for reconnaissance flights over Central America, asking him to carry concealed aerial cameras aboard an Aerostar 600. He would fly low over Nicaragua and Guatemala, snapping images of rebel positions and government installations, with no one the wiser. Around that same time, Pablo Escobar's Medellín Cartel began hunting for couriers. Barry's reputation for safe, daring drops made him an ideal candidate. By 1981, he was making regular runs for the Ochoa brothers, shipping cocaine to Louisiana via secluded airstrips and remote bayous, then tossing kilos into the swamp canopy from 500 feet, his precision unrivaled. He'd become an indispensable part of the cartel's pipeline. With each run he raked in millions, literally living the high life day after day, jets, houses, lavish parties, but each payment only pulled him deeper into the cartel's orbit. But Barry lived with secrets and contradictions. By 1984, federal indictments loomed for smuggling quaaludes and cocaine. Facing at least 10 years prison, he did what had become inevitable: he flipped, cutting a deal with the DEA and offering inside intel on high-level cartel figures. That cooperation triggered a shift. Hidden cameras were installed on board, DEA surveillance teams tracked his flights, and his cover became known, even within cartel circles. His world would never be the same. Still, even as whispers of betrayal spread, Seal continued flying, for money, for thrills, for something he couldn't resist, even as danger closed in. He had become a legend in the skies, half hero, half outlaw. And yet, the lines were blurring. Was he working for the government or undermining it? The CIA supposedly turned a blind eye to his cocaine flights in exchange for the intelligence he provided, while the DEA quietly amassed evidence on both cartel networks and covert arms operations tied to Iran-Contra. From teenage dreamer to decorated pilot, to high-stakes courier for cartels and spooks alike, Barry Seal's origin story is one of ambition entangled with secrecy. A man who soared above limits, and found himself between two colliding worlds. Now, on the edge of collapse, every flight carried more risk, more exposure. And one final journey, one wrong move, would change everything. He landed back in Louisiana with more than just grease on his boots. A chance encounter in a Honduran jail cell had just rewritten his future. Sitting across from him, Roger Reeves, a former cartel pilot with a silver tongue and a dark past. Reeves wasn't just talk, he was a recruiter. And in that jail cell, between roaches and rust, he made Barry Seal an offer he couldn't refuse. Reeves spoke of money, of flights into the jungle, of returns that could buy freedom. One flight. That's all it would take. Barry didn't answer out loud. He didn't need to. His silence was consent. That night, a call came. They told him where to go, a dirt airstrip somewhere outside Tegucigalpa. Midnight. No questions. Cash after delivery. He showed up early, flying solo in a rented twin-engine plane, no markings, no lights. Waiting for him were 4 men in boots, with rifles slung over their shoulders, and a stack of crates that smelled like gasoline and danger. The crates weren't marked, but Barry already knew. Inside, high-purity Colombian cocaine. His cargo, his cross. He loaded them himself. Every movement was fast, silent, mechanical, his heart beat louder than the engines. And then, he took off. No lights. No transponder. Just raw instinct. Barry flew low, dangerously low, skimming treetops, ducking radar, ghosting beneath surveillance. Every tick of the altimeter felt like a countdown to capture. He entered the Gulf Corridor, known to smugglers as the radar blind zone, where oil rig interference kept authorities blind. It was a well-worn path for drug runners, but never without risk. He reached the Louisiana drop zone just before dawn. The sky was pale, humid. Fog hung over the swamps like a veil. A single boat waited below, its operator flashing a coded light. Barry opened the bay doors. He dropped the payload. Within seconds, the boat crew began their retrieval. And just like that, Barry was airborne again, lighter, richer, changed. By nightfall, a wire transfer hit his account. $100,000. For one flight. The high was more than financial. It was the rush. The edge. The gamble. He had just smuggled hundreds of kilos of cocaine into the U.S. and gotten away clean. From that day on, Barry Seal was no longer just a pilot. He was a ghost in the skies. Cartel couriers began to call him El Gordo, the fat man who never missed a drop. With every run, the shipments grew. First a few hundred kilos. Then 1,000. Then more. He became the go-to courier between Sonia Tala, the cartel queen of Bolivia, and Escobar's Medellin network. And he did it all from the most unlikely place on earth, Mena, Arkansas. Mena became his playground. His fortress. He outfitted his planes with hidden compartments, false walls, auxiliary fuel tanks, anything to carry more, risk less. He kept a low profile, no flashy clothes, no expensive cars. But his bank account swelled, and his name began to circulate among intelligence circles. His planes weren't just carrying coke anymore, they were now carrying secrets. It was no longer about the money. It was about the adrenaline. The gamble. The power. Each mission pulled him deeper, into a world where drug lords, CIA assets, and secret wars bled together. But something was shifting. The cartel was growing impatient. They wanted bigger hauls. Faster turnarounds. And one day, a new request came in. This flight wouldn't just carry cocaine. It would carry guns. The stakes had changed. This wasn't just about smuggling anymore. This was geopolitical chess, played with blood, drugs, and American silence. And Barry? He was the plane in the middle. And with one final roar of the engine, Barry Seal crossed the line from smuggler into shadow operative. You just heard about his first smuggling flight, the money, the thrill. But now, something changes. The stakes climb higher, and the lines between drug cartel pilot and covert asset blur. He claimed one evening, while counting cash hidden beneath a false panel in his hangar, a stranger knocked on the office door, a clean-cut man in a dark suit. A briefcase. 2 words, "You work for us." He thought it was cartel extortion. But as the contact continued, meetings in anonymous hotel rooms, surveillance-style eye contact, he realized this was different. This was 1984. Reagan doctrine in full swing. The Iran-Contra crisis was bubbling behind closed doors. We now know this pilot was recruited by a CIA case officer, code-named Monty Schaefer, tasked with flying reconnaissance missions over Central America in exchange for being paid and protected. According to declassified records and accounts behind American-made, by 1984 the agency had begun using pilots like him, transporting equipment, feeding data on Sandinistas in Nicaragua, delivering covert supplies. He secretly flew over rebel camps, dropped off radios, collected intel. In return, his flight logs were erased or altered. His smuggling flights? Never mentioned. Yet as Gary Webb's Dark Alliance revealed, while these covert operations were happening, cocaine shipments bound for U.S. inner cities were passing through the same routes. The CIA Inspector General later admitted that in 1986 some Contra supply networks overlapped with drug traffickers, and were knowingly protected by U.S. agencies. He claims he was told, "Fly what we ask, don't ask questions." Payments arrived via unmarked emissaries. Promises of immunity until they no longer held. The thrill of a conspiracy, a patriotic edge, this is what kept him going. Officially, the CIA has always denied direct involvement in trafficked drugs. But as Fred Hitz acknowledged, they often turned a blind eye to narcotics activity within Contra-aligned factions, even if it was ignored entirely. Congressional hearings in 1987 revealed the scandal: weapons for hostages, arms sold to Iran, profits funneled to Contras. But the leaks didn't stop there. Eugene Hasenfuss, a supply pilot, was captured and confessed flights supplying the Contras, and hinted at bigger secrets. Our pilot watched that unfold with fear. He wasn't naively believing he'd be covered, he knew he was entangled. The phrase echoed, "You work for us now." That meant plausible deniability. For them, any fallout could be chalked up to rogue actors. Meanwhile, on the streets of Los Angeles, crack cocaine exploded in the mid-1980s. Reporter Gary Webb linked those Contras, and possibly CIA-protected traffickers, to the epidemic sweeping urban communities. That explosive reporting claimed U.S. agencies encouraged or turned a blind eye to the trafficking because the money was funding Cold War operations. Inside the pilot's mind, loyalty to his country? Or just using one master to fly for another? The overlap of drug drops and secret missions created a web he couldn't escape. As more missions came in, so did the orders, straps of weapons, secret letters. Everything was hush-hush, but often the cargo didn't clearly unpack. His instructions blurred. Was he a courier for the CIA, or the cartel, or both? He flew nights, faced tight jungle airstrips, dodged radar when cargo planes passed overhead. Some nights, cartel pilots watched him from a distance, curious, cautious. Some nights, CIA intelligence analysts monitored his flights, marking coordinates, checking for deviation. One morning, he received a final note: "Stand down tonight." No explanation. The missions abruptly stopped. The payments ceased. His flight manifest erased. And with it, his sense of safety vanished. He was left in limbo. No longer flown for the CIA, or maybe still watched. No longer paid, or maybe paid off. The cartel connection remained. Now he was at risk from both sides. He understood then, once you agree to work for us now, there is no leaving the contract. Not cleanly. Not quietly. That's how this pilot was drawn into the Iran-Contra vortex, a covert operative, a drug courier, a puppet in a larger gamble. The promise of protection turned fragile. His world should have collapsed, but it didn't, yet. And then it all began to unravel, just as he tried to disentangle himself. You hear the drone of turbine engines before you even see the plane. A battered twin prop, scarred from years of clandestine landings, breaking through the mist over a humid Central American jungle. For the pilot, this wasn't just a flight. It was the beginning of a smuggling empire. At first, the runs were small. Modest payloads. Single-engine planes. But trust grows fast when money arrives on time. And soon, the planes got bigger. The risks, greater. The rewards, unimaginable. He was now making multiple runs a week, flying from secret jungle airstrips in Colombia, landing on roads, farms, even abandoned banana plantations. The pickup locations were crude but efficient. No towers. No lights. Just armed men and trucks, waiting with product. Each takeoff was a gamble, low altitude, radar-dodging flight paths across dense terrain. He flew under the radar, literally, hugging mountainsides and slipping between weather systems. Sometimes he'd drop the cargo from the sky, sealed in watertight barrels, parachutes attached, into the Louisiana swamps below. Other times, he landed on narrow runways, some little more than gravel carved into jungle earth. The cocaine was everywhere now. The weight was measured in tons. And the profits? They were staggering. $500,000 per flight. Sometimes more. But to pull it off, the planes needed to be clever. Hidden compartments beneath the floorboards. False panels behind the cockpit. Lead shielding to throw off X-rays at customs. Flight plans were filed, then changed mid-air. Transponders switched off. Radio silence. It wasn't just smuggling anymore. It was logistics. It was war. He wasn't flying for himself anymore. He was flying for the cartel. For the CIA. For both. They called him the ghost in the sky. Fast, invisible, untouchable. At his peak, he commanded an entire fleet. Multiple pilots. Multiple aircraft. All working under his coded network. This wasn't a solo mission anymore. This was a covert airline. Routes expanded. Costa Rica. Honduras. Panama. Santa Elena, a landing strip originally built for Contra supply drops, now doubling as a cocaine lifeline. He flew into Nicaragua like a ghost. Touching down for only minutes. The drugs were preloaded. Fuel topped off. Back in the air before anyone noticed. His planes passed through radar as if cloaked. Because they were protected. Some say by bribes. Others say by something far more powerful. Millions passed through his hands. So much cash, he buried it in oil drums. So much, he lost track. It wasn't just flying anymore. It was addiction. To the danger. To the power. To the godlike freedom of looking death in the eye, and landing anyway. And yet, with every load, with every dollar, with every runway, the walls began to close. More pilots meant more exposure. More flights meant more attention. And somewhere, high above it all, federal agencies were starting to ask questions. Tail numbers were flagged. Anonymous tips whispered into DA ears. A name. A plane. A connection to Langley. He didn't care. He was in too deep. The cartel trusted him. The money was flowing. And his hands were already bloody. He thought he had more time. He thought no one would catch him. But then, a final shipment. Another humid night. A familiar airstrip. Only this time, something was different. The ground team was late. The fuel truck didn't arrive. And overhead, just for a second, a blinking red light in the sky. He finished loading and took off. But what he didn't know was that he was already being watched. Already being followed. And that the crackdown was already in motion. The empire he built in the clouds was about to be torn apart. Piece by piece. From the sky down. But for that moment, as the wheels lifted from the tarmac, and the jungle shrank beneath him, He was still free. He still believed. He had one more run. By day, Barry Seal was just another suburban dad. He wore khaki pants. Drove a station wagon. He coached Little League. Attended PTA meetings. Took his kids to church on Sunday. He smiled at the neighbors, waved at the mailman. Just a normal guy. At least, that's what it looked like. But by night, Barry was something else entirely. He was flying low over Central America. Dodging radar, landing on jungle airstrips. He met with cartel traffickers and CIA handlers in the same 24 hours. And somewhere in between, he became too valuable to kill. And too dangerous to trust. His life had split cleanly down the middle. On one side, backyard barbecues, sprinklers, and church parking lots. On the other, death flights, coded radio calls, and drug money. He barely slept. And when he did, he kept a loaded revolver under his pillow. Because paranoia wasn't a feeling anymore. It was protocol. Barry Seal had a secret. He wasn't just working with the cartels. He was also smuggling arms for the CIA. 2 masters. 1 man. And not a single soul he could trust. But the strain wasn't just in the skies. It followed him home. His wife noticed the sudden wealth. New cars. Secretive behavior. Excuses that didn't add up. And eyes that never fully came back from wherever he'd been. He always had a story. Another job. Another contract. She wanted to believe him. Love makes room for lies. Especially when the lies are wrapped in stacks of cash. To the outside world, Barry Seal was just doing well. Business was booming. But in reality, he was laundering millions through fake businesses, shell companies. And even an offshore bank he bought just for himself. Then came the surveillance. A car parked down the street for too long. A man in sunglasses at the grocery store, who never bought anything. Barry started seeing eyes everywhere. He became obsessed with safety. He made his kids memorize escape plans. Color codes. What to do if he didn't come home. Then the deaths started. His pilot friends. Guys he'd flown with. Partied with. Trusted. Crashed planes. Bodies found in swamps. Silenced. Erased. Some didn't even make it to the morgue. Just vanished. Others turned up with bullets in their heads. Not a robbery. Not a fight. Just a message. Barry wanted out. He skipped flights. Claimed engine trouble. Started dragging his feet. But the cartel wasn't patient. And the CIA wasn't interested in feelings. Every time his phone rang, he didn't know if it was Langley or Medellin. Both wanted more. Both could kill him. Then, one night, his wife found the flight logs. He'd told her he was flying to Houston. But he was actually headed to Nicaragua. She didn't say a word. She just watched him from across the bed. And Barry felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Real fear. When he landed the next morning, he knew something was wrong. The mechanics didn't speak. A black SUV sat parked in the shadows, engine cold. And then, a flash. Just for a second. From the trees. A camera lens. Someone was watching. And not just watching. Recording. He'd lost control of the game. He wasn't a player anymore. He was a pawn. Barry Seal was no longer untouchable. No longer invisible. He was a man marked by both sides. And now, he couldn't run fast enough. Because when you live 2 lives, one of them always dies. And Barry was starting to wonder which one it would be. By now, Barry Seal was juggling 2 lives that didn't just contradict each other, they were actively trying to destroy one another. By day, he was a family man. Suburban home. School drop-offs. Sunday barbecues. By night, he was something else. A ghost in the sky. A courier of death. And neither side could know about the other. But in 1983, that thin line between the two began to blur, and then it snapped. The cartels wanted more. And more. And more. The profits were too good, the supply too steady. Seal was the golden goose, and the Colombians didn't care how hard they squeezed. They demanded double the shipments. Double the payload. Triple the risk. And the CIA? They were watching it all happen, and quietly asking him to do the same thing. But for them. Officially, the CIA wasn't running drugs. Unofficially, they needed flights into Central America. They needed pilots who wouldn't talk. They needed deniability. And Barry was perfect. In 1 week, Barry flew a load of weapons to Honduras. Then returned the same night with 300 kilos of pure cocaine from Medellin. He barely slept. He barely ate. And the weight on his back was no longer measured in kilos, but in lies. Back in the States, word was spreading. Rumors. Whispers. Even some federal agents started asking, why isn't this guy being arrested? Why does Barry Seal keep getting away? The answer was simple. Because he was protected. But that protection came with a price. A deadly one. The Colombians started noticing the same thing. Why isn't Barry getting caught? Why do American cops keep looking the other way? Is he talking? And in cartel land, suspicion is a death sentence. Suddenly, Barry wasn't just making deliveries. He was being watched by both sides. The DA tailed his every landing. The CIA tapped his phone, listening for cracks. And the cartel? They sent someone to his front lawn. Just to remind him. They knew where his children slept. Barry knew the rules of this game. But the game was changing. It was no longer about flying cargo. Now, it was about survival. In Washington, the Iran-Contra scandal was bubbling just beneath the surface. Secret arms deals. Illegal funding. And somewhere tangled in all of it, was Barry Seal. 1 plane. 2 governments. 3 cartels. And 0 way out. In one instance, the CIA reportedly asked him to fly surveillance over a Nicaraguan airfield to capture photos of Sandinista drug connections. He did it. And just days later, those very photos were leaked. To the White House press. Seal's face. On national television. Labeled as an American patriot. The CIA had painted a target on his back. And the cartels didn't miss. In Colombia, Escobar was furious. His lieutenants demanded answers. Who tipped off the Americans? Who took the photos? And there was only one name on everyone's lips. Back home, Barry tried to lay low. He moved locations. Switched routines. But the silence didn't bring peace. It brought paranoia. And paranoia became obsession. He scanned every street corner. Checked under his car every morning. Slept with a pistol beneath his pillow. Every phone call could be the last. Every knock on the door could be a bullet. And worse. He no longer knew who he was working for. Was it the government? The cartels? Or was he just a pawn in a game he never truly understood? Then came the final deal. One more flight. One more drop. One more promise that this would be the last. It wasn't. Because this time, Barry never saw the runway. As he touched down, 3 cars pulled in from the tree line, no lights, no plates. He knew, instantly, that this was it. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. Not the DA. Not the CIA. Not even Barry Seal himself. He had done it 100 times. Gear down. Low pass over jungle canopy. 2 clicks on the radio. and the signal flares would rise like fireflies from the hidden strip below. But something was off this time. The coordinates were right. The cargo was heavy. But there were no flares. Just silence. And in that silence, Barry Seal felt, for the first time, like he wasn't alone in the sky. Altitude held. RPM steady. But every instinct in him screamed one word. Abort. He banked west and vanished into the clouds. The deal could wait. The risk couldn't. The jungle was no longer safe. Not because of the cartel, but because of something far more dangerous. The United States government. The DEA was watching. So was the FBI. And the IRS. And the ATF. And, maybe, still, the CIA. It had become a circus of agencies. And Barry Seal was the elephant in the center ring. It started with a tail number. A single slip-up. An FAA clerk flagged a C-123 cargo plane that had been decommissioned, then mysteriously re-registered to a shell company in Arkansas. The clerk sent it up the chain. 2 weeks later, the DA had the whole string. They called it Operation Screaming Eagle. Satellites were repositioned. Field agents were embedded in Nicaraguan villages. Airfields once used for banana shipments were now under round-the-clock surveillance. But Barry kept flying. And every time he landed safely, he felt invincible. Almost divine. But paranoia isn't a switch. It's a slow leak. He started noticing things. A different bartender at the place he always drank. A man in mirrored sunglasses at the fuel station, pretending to read a newspaper. Static on radio channels that had once been clean. The sky wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the watchers. One night, at a gas station in Baton Rouge, a stranger walked past him and whispered. "They know." Nothing more. Just that. Barry didn't sleep that night. Didn't even go home. He drove for hours. Ditched his car. Rented a motel room under a fake name. And in that stale room, lit by the hum of a fluorescent bulb, he finally admitted it. He was being hunted. The next morning, 2 black sedans parked outside his hangar. The drivers never got out. They just watched. The same vehicles followed him to a diner, to the post office, to a public payphone. He had flown over the jungles of Colombia. He had negotiated with killers and smiled in the face of death. But this cold, coordinated silence. It terrified him. He tried to reach his contact at the CIA. No answer. Then the line disconnected, permanently. He was a ghost now. No protection. No agency. And the airfield, the one that had made him rich, that had made him a legend. That airfield was a trap. They had cameras hidden in the trees. Infrared. Motion sensors. Heat-seeking drones before drones were even public. Every landing was recorded. Every takeoff, analyzed. They were building a case. Waiting. Letting him run long enough to tie the noose himself. And the cartel? They smelled it too. Word came from Medellin. If the gringo talks, he's dead. He was trapped. By the government. By the cartel. By the very greed that once made him untouchable. So he tried to fly less. Tried to act like everything was normal. But it was already too late. One morning, just before dawn, Barry sat alone in his kitchen, staring at a Polaroid that had been left in his mailbox overnight. It was him. Standing beside his plane. Smiling. And in the corner of the photo, a scope's crosshairs. No note. No warning. Just a message. We see you. He had 2 choices. Talk. Or run. And the thing about Barry was, he never ran. Not from cops. Not from cartels. Not even from the CIA. He picked up the phone. Dialed a number he swore he'd never call. And when the line picked up, He gave them everything. Drop points. Flight paths. Names. Ranks. Dates. Even photos. The U.S. government had been trying to bring down the Medellin Cartel for years. But what Barry gave them was a nuclear bomb. And now, the walls were closing in on everyone. Not just the traffickers. Not just Barry. But the people who had once protected him. Who had used him. And were now desperate to erase the evidence. Because the moment Barry Seal agreed to testify, he didn't just become a witness. He became a target. He thought he could just walk away. After years of dancing in the dark, smuggling millions in cocaine, delivering arms to Central America, running secret missions for people whose names never appeared on paper, Barry Seal believed he'd earned his exit. But in this world, there is no clean way out. And Barry was about to learn the cost of flying too close to the sun. Seal had started talking, not just to his lawyers, but to federal agents. DEA. ATF. Even the White House wanted to hear what he had to say. And Barry? He was ready to talk. Maybe he thought confessing would save him. Maybe he thought exposing the cartel would buy his freedom. Or maybe, he knew too much to stay silent any longer. Because the truth? Barry Seal wasn't just a drug smuggler. He was a witness to something much bigger. In secret meetings with the DEA, Barry spilled everything. He gave them flight routes. Drop points. Names. He even named the Colombian kings behind the Medellin Cartel. And when the feds asked for more, Barry agreed to go back in. Wired. Risking his life to catch the cartel in action, with the cameras rolling. It was the ultimate betrayal. The sting operation was simple. Dangerous. And deadly. Barry flew into Nicaragua under CIA flight clearance, allegedly delivering aid. But in reality, he was filming cartel operatives loading kilos of cocaine, in the presence of Nicaraguan military officers. Evidence. Evidence that could connect the cocaine epidemic not just to Colombia, but to the Contras. And, indirectly, to the CIA. Seal turned over the footage. The DEA called it a gold mine. The White House? They leaked it. In 1986, the images made front-page headlines across America. CIA plane captures cartel drug deal in Nicaragua. But the leak burned Barry's cover. Overnight, the man who had flown for kings, presidents, and criminals, became a walking target. Cartel eyes were everywhere. And Barry? He'd just painted a bullseye on his own back. He moved from hotel to hotel. Switched cars daily. Kept a revolver tucked in his waistband even while brushing his teeth. But the walls were closing in. He begged the DEA for protection. They said their hands were tied. He asked the CIA if they'd help him disappear. They didn't respond. The agency that once used him had erased him. But someone hadn't forgotten. One evening, Barry received a call from a man he knew, a fellow smuggler turned middleman. He told Barry there was a way out. That if he just flew one more job, they could settle the heat. Clean slate, he promised. But Barry didn't trust him. Not anymore. He declined. 3 days later, the man was found dead in a canal outside Miami. 2 bullets to the chest. Execution style. Barry knew what that meant. They were cleaning house. Every night, Barry scanned the parking lot. Every morning, he checked under his car for bombs. But paranoia wasn't enough to save him. In February 1986, Barry was sentenced by a Louisiana judge to 6 months in a halfway house. No guards. No protection. No security. And the judge, despite being warned by federal agents, refused to move the sentencing. On February 19, Barry arrived at the Salvation Army halfway house in Baton Rouge. He ate dinner alone. Called his wife. Said he felt strange. Like someone was watching. He was right. Just after 6 p.m., Barry walked to his Cadillac, the same routine as always. Only this time, there were two men waiting in a blue Buick across the lot. As Barry sat down in the driver's seat, they pulled alongside. Windows down. Silencers up. 6 shots tore through the car door. He died instantly. The getaway car sped off. 2 days later, the gunmen, Colombian nationals, were arrested. They were tied directly to the Medellín Cartel. But when pressed, the men refused to say who had ordered the hit. And the deeper investigators dug, the more questions they found. How did the cartel know where he'd be? Why did federal agencies fail to protect him? And most disturbing of all, why was Barry Seal denied witness protection when he held the keys to one of the biggest drug conspiracies in U.S. history? Some said he was sacrificed, a necessary cleanup to protect higher powers. Others believed the CIA had cut him loose, knowing what would happen. A pawn discarded. Or, a witness silenced. What is certain, is this. Barry Seal died not as a drug smuggler. Not as a federal witness. But as a man caught between two worlds, and betrayed by both. And yet, even in death, his secrets refused to stay buried. Because within weeks, investigators found something strange in his private safe. A set of flight logs. Marked dates. Codenames. And at the bottom, a list of American officials. Some of those names? Still classified to this day. And that's when everything changed. Because Barry Seal wasn't just a casualty of the drug war. He was the spark to something even darker. They say the sky was his hiding place. No roads, no border checkpoints. Just altitude, and silence. For years, the pilot played his double game. Flying low, off the radar. Moving cargo that could topple governments. Or bankroll wars. But every sky has its ceiling. It didn't end with a shootout. Or a cinematic escape. It ended with a mechanic. And a tip. A man named Barry Seal was prepping his next run. Routine, quiet, just like the 100 before. Only this time. Someone was watching. A hangar assistant noticed something odd. Too many logs, too few maintenance records. Unusual fuel purchases. And the same tail number flagged by the DEA 2 months prior. He made a call. And that call set everything in motion. The DEA had been waiting. Tracking movements. Watching flights from Mina, Arkansas to Nicaragua. To Colombia. When the plane touched down on February 17, 1984. They moved in. Seal walked into the trap. Calm. Focused. Carrying a flight bag stuffed with documents. And undeclared cash. They found more than cocaine. They found ledgers. Photographs. Flight maps. Proof of an operation far larger than anyone had dared imagine. The arrest wasn't the story. The story was what he said next. In a stark federal interrogation room. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Barry Seal said 9 words that stopped the agents cold. I flew for the CIA. You need to call Langley. At first, they laughed. Another narco sob story, they thought. Another liar trying to talk his way out. But then, he started naming names. Operation names. Drop zones. Aircraft IDs only insiders could know. He described meetings with Contra leaders. Airstrips built with government funds. Flights into jungles escorted by men in unmarked fatigues. The room fell silent. Phones rang. Federal agents stepped outside. And for the first time in years, Barry Seal smiled. He struck a deal. Testimony, in exchange for reduced charges. But not in a courtroom. They needed proof. And Seal had pictures. He agreed to fly one more time. But this time, the DEA would be watching. They outfitted the plane with hidden cameras. Infrared. Timers. Barry would fly to Nicaragua. Deliver the drugs. and catch the men behind it on tape. It was dangerous. Reckless. Possibly suicidal. But he did it anyway. The images he brought back shook Washington. There they were. Men unloading cocaine. From an airstrip built with U.S. money. Men who were supposed to be fighting communism. Not smuggling dope. The White House panicked. The CIA denied everything. SEAL's name, once protected, was now a liability. And just like that, Barry was out in the open. No more hiding. No more cover. The media caught wind. Headlines screamed. CIA-linked pilot caught smuggling cocaine. Drug flights funded by Uncle Sam? The courtroom was chaos. Federal agents testified. So did SEAL. Naming names no one expected to hear. He described meeting Noriega. Flying into Honduras under fake manifests. Working both for and against cartels at the same time. He wasn't just a smuggler. He was a witness. A risk. A time bomb. His lawyers begged for witness protection. Relocation. New identity. The judge said no. He was sentenced to community service at a Salvation Army center. In Baton Rouge. Public. Exposed. A sitting duck. The DA warned. This man won't last 6 months. They were wrong. It only took 2. On February 19, 1986. As Barry walked to his car, a blue sedan pulled up. 3 men stepped out. Colombian hitmen. Hired by the Medellín Cartel. 7 bullets. SEAL died instantly. No bodyguards. No agents. No justice. The U.S. government washed its hands. His files were sealed. The agents he worked with disappeared. And the CIA? They've never publicly acknowledged his name. But his family. His tapes. And the photographs. They still exist. Barry Seal knew too much. He saw too much. And in the end, he said too much. But even in death, he left behind something the government couldn't bury. A question. A crack in the official story. A trail that leads deeper. Because the files, the flights, and the names he mentioned were just the beginning. The courtroom was silent. Not out of respect, but confusion. The man who stood accused of trafficking billions in cocaine wasn't facing life. He wasn't facing execution. He wasn't even behind bars. He was smiling. And before anyone could understand how or why, he was gone. That man was Barry Seal. A pilot. A trafficker. And, according to him, a contract asset for the Central Intelligence Agency. Officially, he was just a criminal. Unofficially, he knew far too much. About cocaine. About Contras. About the very government that claimed to want him behind bars. And then, the documents began to vanish. Court files sealed. Flight logs shredded. Operations he claimed to have flown for? Erased. Even the journalists digging too deep were warned. One reporter was told flatly, "You're asking questions that get people killed." One by one, connections were wiped from the record. Seal's ties to the White House's secret war in Nicaragua? Nowhere to be found. His plane logs, gone. His handlers, denied. Even sealed grand jury transcripts disappeared, as if someone had cut out the heart of the investigation with a scalpel. And then came the silencing. People connected to the story disappeared. A mechanic who worked on Seal's planes was found dead in a Florida canal. A customs agent who flagged his tail numbers. Transferred. Then fired. No reason given. An informant who claimed he heard CIA agents brag about using Barry vanished from witness protection. What kind of case loses all its evidence, all its witnesses, and still ends in a conviction? None. That's why Barry Seal never got one. Instead, he was offered a deal. A public cooperation arrangement. They said he'd testify against the Medellín Cartel. But what he actually did was put the CIA on trial, without ever taking the stand. And then, February 19, 1986. He was gunned down in Baton Rouge. Not inside his house. Not in hiding. But outside a Salvation Army halfway house, where the court had forced him to stay as part of his probation. No guards. No protection. A man who smuggled for the most dangerous cartel in the world, and who claimed to have worked for the U.S. government, was left to fend for himself. 3 Colombian hitmen were arrested. Convicted. But even their statements raised new questions. One of them said, "We were told the Americans would look the other way." Look the other way? Or make room for the shot? Here's what no one wants to talk about. The agents who used Barry Seal. They were never named. The officials who allowed him to fly dope for intelligence ops. Promoted. The Air Force base where he dropped cocaine in exchange for weapons. Still operational. And when journalists filed FOIA requests, they got pages like this. They say Seal acted alone. But the flight logs from Mena, Arkansas show dozens of landings. Cargo pallets. Unmarked crates. Military trucks on standby. Who was flying those? Nobody's saying. But they weren't drug runners. They had clearance. And if Barry Seal was just a rogue pilot, why did the vice president's security detail call him by name? Why did Oliver North's memos mention Seal's aircraft? Why did entire operations shift when he died? And why did someone, just 2 days after his murder, break into a storage unit where he kept all his flight tapes? The lock was cut. The tapes were gone. It's as if the moment he was silenced, history began erasing him. The government buried him under redactions. The media stopped asking questions. And the public? They forgot. But not everyone did. A retired DEA agent, under the condition of anonymity, said, "We weren't allowed to touch him for years. We didn't know if he was with the feds, or if the feds were with him." Seal's murder wasn't just an execution. It was an erasure. A final edit in a long-running, covert screenplay written by shadows, paid in cash, and signed in jet fuel. And the only proof left is what's missing. Because sometimes, what's not in the record screams louder than what is. But even when the records vanish, and the names are lost, and the silence grows thick, the question refuses to die. Did the government protect Barry Seal, or did they kill him? Because if they did kill him, what else have they buried? There are still sealed files. Still unnamed agents. Still operations no one will admit ever existed. But the deeper you look, the more faces start to disappear. Until you're left staring into a wall of silence, wondering if the rabbit hole ever had a bottom at all. They called it justice. A drug smuggler caught. A criminal executed. Case closed. But nothing about Barry Seal's death was simple. Because hours before he was gunned down in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Barry told a friend, "If anything happens to me, look to the CIA." His murder was precise. 3 bullets. To the head. In broad daylight. But here's where the story fractures. According to court records, Barry Seal had been working with the DEA, exposing massive drug operations. According to Barry, he had flown guns into Nicaragua for the CIA. And brought cocaine back for the cartels. So which was it? Was he a drug runner turned informant? Or an asset gone rogue? The government said it was open and shut. They said the Medellín Cartel had put a hit on him in retaliation for snitching. They even arrested 3 Colombians for the murder. But, a classified memo obtained years later paints a very different picture. That memo shows Seal had been flying covert missions authorized by the CIA as part of an operation to fund Nicaraguan Contras. The same operation that became the infamous Iran-Contra affair. And then, there's the plane. The very plane Barry used to smuggle drugs was registered to a company with known CIA ties. Coincidence? Or was Barry working both sides of the shadow war? Let's rewind. Months before his death, Barry flew a C-123K cargo plane into Nicaragua. On board was a secret camera. He captured photos of Sandinista soldiers helping load cocaine into crates alongside Colombian cartel members. The images were explosive. Proof, he said, that the Sandinistas were funding themselves through drugs. Proof the Reagan administration desperately needed. Barry expected protection. He'd done his job. Handed the government its smoking gun. But what he got instead was a death sentence. The White House leaked the photos to the press. That leak destroyed his cover. Now the cartels knew. Barry Seal was the mole. And the CIA? They went silent. Some believe Barry became too dangerous to keep alive. He knew too much. About the cocaine. About the Contras. About who in the U.S. government was involved. Others say he was just reckless. An adrenaline junkie who flew too close to the sun. But a former CIA pilot, Tosh Plum Lee, said this in a 1993 interview. Barry was one of ours. And we left him out there to die. The DA denies any involvement. The CIA refuses to comment. But pieces of the puzzle still drift to the surface. In 2015, a Freedom of Information Act request revealed more files related to Barry had been permanently sealed for national security. Then, there's what his family believes. His widow has said publicly that Barry was afraid in his final days. He believed his own government wanted him silenced. And when the bullets came, no agents, no police, no backup ever showed. And then, silence. No follow-up. No inquiries. No commission. Just a body buried. A legacy erased. And a pilot who disappeared into the storm of American covert history. But there's one more twist. Some claim Barry never died. The man in the image matched his build. His gait. Even his voice, according to one investigator. Was it a fake death? A CIA extraction? A reward for silence? We don't know. We may never know. Because when you work in the shadows, sometimes, that's where your story ends. But here's what we do know. Barry Seal was many things. A smuggler. A patriot. A liar. A hero. A traitor. And maybe, just maybe, a man who saw too much. Barry Seal's life and death expose a story not just about drugs, but about power, covert alliances, and secrets buried deep. Barry Seal's life and death expose a story not just about drugs, but about power, covert alliances, and secrets buried deep. He operated at the crossroads of drug cartels and shadow warfare, smuggling cocaine for the Medellín Cartel, then turning informant to the DEA. Public records show a hidden CIA-installed camera on his C-123K plane, capturing Sandinista officials loading cocaine, used for political leverage during Iran-Contra. As Eric Tosh Plum Lee, a former CIA contract pilot, said, "I helped rig that camera on the 123. He confirmed Seal worked closely with military intelligence, not the official CIA chain, and flew weapons to the Contras before drug routes followed. Investigations reaffirmed that the Mena, Arkansas airport, Seal's base, was simultaneously used for covert Contra flights, while Seal's drug routes passed through. Behind closed doors, agencies claimed Seal never worked for the CIA, but admitted they helped service his aircraft during DEA sting operations in Nicaragua. In early 1984, Seal flew that plane into Nicaragua on a DEA-sanctioned mission, snapping photos of Escobar and a Sandinista loading cocaine, evidence that fueled U.S. political strategy in Central America. Leaks soon followed. News reports revealed the operation, blowing Seal's cover. Cartels learned they'd been played, and placed $1 million contract on his life, $500,000 to kill, $1 million if captured alive. With no armed guard and under strict probation terms that ban weapons, Seal became an easy target. On February 19, 1986, two Colombians ambushed him at the Salvation Army halfway house in Baton Rouge and shot him dead, without federal protection. Afterward, silence. No government inquiry. No public apology. No official reckoning. Instead, dissent grew. Redacted FOIA files and sealed memos suggest deeper cover-ups. Congressional hearings turned up speculation but no smoking gun. Whistleblowers and journalists like Gary Webb painted a picture of a convenience alliance, U.S. agencies tolerating drug smuggling to fund anti-communist forces. In the end, Barry Seal was many things: pilot, smuggler, informant, political tool, and a man who vanished under the glare of power. The truth remains murky. Court records, witness claims, declassified summaries, they all conflict. Yet one question lingers. Comment below, do you think the CIA was involved in Barry Seal's death? Was he silenced? Used? Abandoned? If you've watched all the way here, thank you. If this captivated you, hit like. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because this rabbit hole only gets darker. Next time, we dive into the story no one wants told. Hidden in bureaucratic darkrooms. Whispered by whistleblowers. Buried in files still locked behind labels, I only. Until then. Who's flying into the next flight of secrets?